To the US now, President-elect Donald Trump says he will increase tariffs on day one of his presidency. Now, in a post on social media, Truth Social, he said this would include 25% on goods from Mexico and Canada until they clamp down on drugs, particularly fentanyl, and migrants crossing the border illegally. The move looking like it would violate a current free trade deal. Trump having also promised a 10% hike on tariffs for China. Joining me now is France 24's Cami Knight from our business desk. Cami, just take me through what exactly do these tariffs actually entail?
Well, Trump's love for tariffs is nothing new. It was a recurring feature of his campaign, but it's turned into a much more concrete threat since his posts on social media. Like you mentioned, he's vowed to implement a 25% tariff on all products from Mexico and Canada and to install a 10% levy on goods from China, this on top of additional tariffs. Now, China's already subject to tariffs from both Trump's first term and the Biden administration, and the 10% announced is actually lower than many expected from his rhetoric on the campaign trail. But when it comes to Mexico and Canada, implementing a blanket 25% tariff on all products would violate the US-Canada-Mexico free trade agreement that Trump signed himself in 2020 and that he's routinely referenced as a political victory in it.
Why does he love tariffs so much, Cami? And I mean, how do they work and what, in fact, is their impact?
So tariffs are a central part of Trump's economic vision. He sees them as a way of encouraging production to move back to the US to reverse years of industrial decline. He says they'll help grow the US economy, protect jobs and raise tax revenue. In practice, those claims are misleading because while they do raise tax revenue, the charges are physically paid by the domestic company that imports the goods, not the foreign company that exports them. Simply put, a tariff is a tax paid by a US firm to the US government. Now, understanding who it ends up impacting more is a little more complicated, but there are three possible scenarios. If the US firm that's importing the product passes on the cost by raising retail prices, then it's the US consumer that will take on the burden. If the company decides to absorb the cost of the tariff to avoid raising prices, then the burden falls on the US firm that will make lower profits. The third possibility is that foreign exporters might have to lower their own wholesale prices by the value of the tariff in order to retain their US customers. Now, all three scenarios are possible, but economic studies of the impact of tariffs that Trump imposed in his first term would suggest the most economic burden was ultimately borne by US customers. And of course, one of the major risks when it comes to slapping tariffs on foreign goods is retaliatory tariffs and the start of a trade war.
So how important are Mexico, Canada and China for US trade?
Well, the US is the world's biggest importer, and it's the world's second largest trading nation behind China. According to the USTR, imports from China accounted for more than 16% of all goods coming into the country in 2022. And China, Mexico and Canada are by far the US's top trading partners. So let's take a look at what the US imports from these countries. The top import from Canada is oil, which reached a record 4.3 million barrels per day in July. It also imports cars, machinery, plastics and wood. Now, from Mexico, America gets the majority of its cars and car parts, and from China, America imports a significant amount of electronics. Now, of course, these are just a few examples, but all of these industries would be impacted.
So what's been the reaction so far?
Well, like you can imagine, it's not been too positive. In Canada, we haven't heard from Justin Trudeau yet, but Doug Ford, who is Premier of Ontario, says the 25% tariff would be devastating to workers and jobs in both Canada and the US. Now, in Mexico, the president is also yet to respond, but the finance minister has warned in the past that any taxes imposed on Mexican goods would trigger retaliatory tariffs. China, meanwhile, saying that nobody would benefit from a trade war. So why is Trump doing this? Well, some think that it may be a negotiating tactic, announcing this so far in advance so that countries come to him to negotiate better trade agreements. But it's very likely that at least China, who's been bracing for this for some time, is already focusing on finding countermeasures.
And I understand the biggest word today, or the most popular word being used on Google search, is indeed the word tariff. Thank you, Cami Knight. That's Cami Knight.